It's okay, I just didn't want that on. All right. Good morning, everybody. Here we are for the Budget Committee meeting, Monday, February 7th, 2022 at 10 a.m. And at this point in time, I'd like to call this meeting to order. Do we have any disclosure of pecuniary interest and general nature thereof? Seeing none, we'll move on to the Budget Committee discussions and recommendations. And I believe, Cindy, you're taking the floor.
Thanks. Yes, and through the warden, we're just going to put up the presentation. So at our last meeting, this is always the last piece. We hear from each one of the department heads. They do a presentation on their budget. Then we come back and we kind of pull it all together and we look at what the big picture is going to look like. So what the total levy increase and the total tax rate. So the committee at the last meeting asked if I would put a number of scenarios together. So I'm going to kind of walk you through 6 scenarios that we worked on during the weekend. So I would like to thank Bill and Chris for their involvement in putting these together as well. So we're going to start with the first one. So the first scenario is the original submission that we made. It is 9.71. So it includes the budget as submitted to the committee, but it also applies to growth, which we know is a 1.266. It also applies that $133,000 of provincial COVID-19 funding. And in that, we did the $33,000, which was identified in the IT budget, was offsetting 50% of that new human resource position. The other 50% of that position is for land ambulance, so that position will be supporting land ambulance as well. And then we also have the offset for the new communications position. Before you go on, Greg, so if you look at the little recap sheet that I provided you, so it's the detail one. So I'm just going to walk you through where you're going to see these adjustments so as we go along to make it easier. So if you look across at the Lodge, what is here? So no, this one, because this is the original one. At the very bottom, you see the growth and reassessment impact. It's in the very bottom. So you see the 2022, and it's almost right at the end. That's where you see the 1666. We're just on that. Yep. And then we also have the COVID. So again, near the bottom, probably about the 4th one up, you see COVID-19, and you see that 133,000. So it's a negative because that's considered a revenue. It helps reduce costs. And same with the growth. It also would be considered a revenue, so it reduces the cost. So those are the 2 big ones that are on that document. Then we're going to go to scenario. Before I go on, any questions in regards to the first scenario? Okay, great. We go on to slide number 2. So slide number 2 is looking at 1.95. So in that one, I made an adjustment for land ambulance because the original one had without the PSAB adjustment. So I put the PSAB adjustments in. It's important because when we do provide this to the city, we want to make sure that we're showing exactly what we will get for funding from the province, or we're forecasting to get from the province. So there's a slight increase of that 6,391. I know we talked a little bit about the library rent on the last discussion. It will net out to 0, so I haven't included that one, but it'll be fixed before we go to budget committee to make sure the right amount's there. And as a reminder, there's a little bit of an increase in the rent to go to the inflation rate, CPI. The offset will be, there'll be a surplus. So I'm just going to increase the surplus by that. I've already checked and that's available. So the next one would be looking at Stratfor Lodge. So on Friday, Chris and myself talked to the administrator there to see if there's any ability to push forward some costs, just in terms of can you get products currently. So these are large products, they're commercial, industrial. So there's a bit of a lag, as we know right now, with COVID-19 going on. So we had a look at that. So in this model, we're recommending, one, the transfer from reserve. Instead of that $350,000, which would leave the reserve at about $500, we thought we would just do $250,000. So that would leave a little bit over $100,000 in that reserve. So there's something. And we reduced the capital by $174,000. So the new capital balance would be $715,300. So that makes up, if we look at the Lodge detail of their capital, it's the walk-in coolers, the fridges, and the washer and dryer.
How does that work? You're talking about. You're saying that because those things, like Washington guards are going to take X number of months. But you don't put a placeholder, you just leave it and go next year, or what?
Yeah, through the, like, I mean, the discussion we had with Tony, or, excuse me, Brent.
You went
I'm going back. At least I didn't say Larry.
Yeah.
But with Brent. So much like when we're tendering our equipment, the same type of thing. So later this year, working with Brent and John about tendering this stuff out because of the long lead time. Basically, what we asked Brent on last week was, do you know how long the delivery is on some of these items? And he didn't have the time to come back with that information. But he also asked, we also asked about prioritizing things on the list. And these were things that he felt would be okay in operation. Weren't ones that he put down that would be a high priority for replacement. So essentially we come back to council in the fall and say, are these things out late in the year for delivery, sort of in spring or summer, and then, you know, we won't pay out a dime on any of these things at delivery, so, you know, essentially budget items, yeah. And then, as Cindy said, the reserve, you know, $500 doesn't buy you much, and we should have some money in that reserve for a cushion in case we have a failure, a catastrophic failure piece of equipment.
Well, if you do need it, it's reserved, but.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. So the next one, of course, is again, it's the growth number. It's going to be in each one of these, but I thought I would highlight it. The next one is looking at the tax rate stabilization. So as you know, each year, if we do need additional dollars to reduce our levy, we do go use the tax rate stabilization. And as a reminder, each year in the tax rate stabilization, if there is a surplus from the previous year, we do put it in there. And last year we did have a surplus. So, you know, a little bit less than the 3.4 million, but it was a significant amount of that. The next one is looking at the winter maintenance. So Mr. Shaney and I had a bit of a conversation on Friday to look at that again. We reran the numbers, the actual numbers. So we're comfortable here saying that 200,000, we could apply it and put it towards decreasing the tax dollars. So there still is, we figure that there's close to a little over 900,000 is what we figure currently. So that's a big change from when we first started this process. We were looking at about 400,000 or 500,000. So
it's 900,000.
Yeah, about 900,000. 200,000. Yeah, we're just taking 200 of the 9.
Yeah, the principle was we get close to balancing the roads budget at zero. 200, because we're at about 206,000 increase and 200,000 back to zero, and still give us. You know, in my opinion, and Cindy's as well, the level of the winter maintenance reserve really isn't where it should be yet. We've been coming out of this deep hole for a number of years. We're getting closer, but that's a big surplus for us. We had a really good year last year, weather-wise, for us. So I'm more than comfortable saying, you know, 200.
I'm a bit confused.
Okay.
Start with this question first. You just said that you're not quite where you want it to be.
Yeah.
I guess, what is the number that you're comfortable with?
Ideally, we'd like to see a year's worth of winter maintenance costs in our reserve. So we need to be north of 4 million. We've come a long way. We were in the negatives for a number of years, and we're getting closer to 3 million. And I think over time, this year has been pretty good again, so I'm assuming we'll make.
I know.
I'm assuming we'll have another good year this year for winter maintenance numbers, so I think we will see another surplus just based on our January numbers. So we'll get there, and it doesn't need to go from 0 to 4 million.
So, and then you said that you were at about $900,000.
After, yes, 2021.
I thought in this one here,
Yep.
your projected for that for 2021 is 1.7.
That's after you add the 800,
Yeah.
801 to the 1.7. So if you add the almost $1 million.
Oh, okay. So then you're adding the 900 to the 800.
Yeah.
Okay.
So,
Gotcha. Okay.
So the full amount's actually in there.
Okay.
So
Understood.
if you make some changes here,
So then 1,860 would be, if we didn't take anything out, that would be projected
Okay,
at the end of 2022, if we didn't take money out of it.
Correct.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's not look at then
Don't look
2022.
at
So what
that,
we're
yeah.
saying is we're projecting at the end of 2021 to have 1.7. And so you're comfortable taking 200 out, which would give us 1.5 in that.
Correct.
That was the same question I had. I was just a little bit, what is the final balance?
Your TLDR was, what's the balance? What is
Yeah, that was where I was testing.
Yeah,
Kathy just added more flavor.
million and a,
More flavor to the question.
Never
I'll
a direct pass.
I'll pass,
Never a direct
I'll pass, leave the room eventually.
All right. Well, through the warden, we did that to make sure that you were able to see what the impact as the budget was submitted. So the original copy, if you remember, I sent it, I highlighted things in green, and those are the ones that I would be mostly talking about today. So in addition to the winter maintenance, we also had, we looked at COVID funding, and again, it's the same amount of that $133,000. So again, 33 from IT, and then towards those two staff positions. For scenario 2. If no other questions, we'll move on to scenario 3. So just a little bit of a different tweak. So again, we have the land ambulance adjustment of the $6,391. The next one was taking a look at the lodge. Now this is a little bit of an increase from the last one that you see. So it is $139,000 that would come off. So in addition to those capital items we talked about previously that added up to the $174,000, we have the point-click care software. So again, this was one of the items that the administrator did put forward, and we talked a little bit about if there was modernization funding from the province. This is one that would align really nicely with that. So if that funding did come from the province, we would apply it. If we didn't get that, then the following year, it would be put back in the budget to ask for. It is a really good software product. It would lead to modernization. However, if we are looking at the lodge, they've been through, I would say, a lot in the last few years with COVID and all the pressures. So putting that off probably one more year wouldn't hurt in regards to that. But that's just a recommendation that we have in front of you. And then we also looked to we reduced the transfer from reserves. So switched it up a little bit from that 250, and this version shows 200. So it's showing an extra 150,000 that would be put in that reserve. So that makes that reserve just a little bit stronger. The next one we looked at, so over the weekend, I went back and looked at the supplementary taxes and the write-off. And each year I send a little spreadsheet out to each one of the treasurers in the lower tier. So by Friday, I got a few of them back, but I got the larger one back. So I have the ones back from Thames Centre, I have from Middlesex Centre, Stratfor Lodge, and one other one. So that makes up a lot of the tax base. So I felt comfortable enough that I thought we could put in another 100,000. So that's a revenue line. So it decreases the admin budget by 100,000. So that takes the supplementary tax from 700,000 to 800,000. I also added, well, again, we go back to the growth map, which is the 1,266,900, similar throughout all of them. Now, the next big item would be the tax rate stabilization reserve. So that would be $3,250,000 for this version. We went and looked at the surplus and the winter maintenance, and this version is showing $225,000 coming out. So that would be an increase of $25,000 compared to the previous scenario. And then the last one is the COVID. We talked about that at $133,000.
So I just want to get it clear in my head. We're still taking out the fridges and the whatnot, and then we're taking away the software.
Correct.
But you're your position that the software is just one more stressor to already stress lunch. That it'll be better next year.
And we will try to apply if there's additional modernization funding from the province. We will try to apply for that. So if we get that, we may be able to start it later in the year by the time we go out and do the RFP and get the vendor to do that. But yes.
There's a good chance that modernization funding will come forward, do you think?
That's
Election funding, yeah.
yes, election. So we've been very lucky in the past with modernization. I do think this fits nicely.
Sounds like a perfect
modernization.
case study for it.
Yeah, so,
So if the province wants to pay for it, that's not going to be.
So we'll know fairly soon too whether we get it, but we'll not.
We'll know fairly soon. Wait for, like, a conference, like, to announce something like that, but of course, the Good Roads Conference.
We'll push to April, right?
So we'll know whether there's going to be an application process, and then what we'll do is, we're ready to go with an application, so it's not like it'll take a long. Find out whether we get it.
That's tight if they wait to get
That's
roads because the election's in June.
No, I realize.
Your 30
We
days.
need to make the.
I meant that they
Yeah.
probably.
Well, and make the announcement open and close because
Yeah, they have
once
to
the rate
put
is
that-
dropped,
We've stopped with.
I meant that they would normally announce
Do
something.
they have to get it done?
They would normally have announced that in February at Good Roads, is what I meant, and now I don't know what they'll do, because that's normally what.
6 weeks later.
They'll probably announce something soon if they're going.
I think we'll have to wait. We'll know whether.
The size of the other thing that's interesting is I've been asking around is how, every time we go through a modernization, there's less and less other people that apply. Like, how the first intake, Kathy, there was like loads of people, everybody applied. The second one less, the third, it kept on getting narrower, and the fund size is fairly similar all the way through. So it just makes it so that if you're ready, I think you have a pretty good chance.
I think the only other comment that Brent made last week was it's an ambitious list of capital, and whether or not they have the resources to fulfill everything on that whole list in this calendar year. So that was the other issue, is this Point Click is a big project. And there's a lot of other big projects in there as well. And again, this again is not from Cindy and Bill and I, this is Brent making this comment himself to say this is one that we could look
he
at.
did say that. He was quite forthright about saying that it was ambitious. He acknowledged that.
And it's not something, it doesn't, there's no lack of services. It's just modernization, basically.
yeah, through the word, so they currently do have a software system there.
Yeah.
This is just, I would say, probably, a better one, and it's a best practice. It's probably a better way to say it. So a lot of other municipalities use it. We know that the provincial government likes this one, so when we have auditors come in there, they seem to like that software, they're a bit more comfortable with that software. But I want to point out, it also takes some staff time if you want to implement a new software system, training it, learning it, so.
But may not be the best time.
Correct, yeah. Any other questions about any of those ones on this list?
Just one thing about Point Click. When the money comes, the timeline to implement, the quote, like, how long can we push that out? Like, if we get the money this year, we have to get started on it. Have to, because we can roll it into next year.
Through the warden, I would assume, just based on the other timelines that we have for funding, I would assume that if we did get another round of modernization dollars, it really wouldn't come into play until 2023.
Good.
Like, you have to go, you have to do the RP and get it ready, but by the time, you have to have it fully implemented and in, I would think that that would probably lead us closer to 2020. Or maybe the end of 2022, but I'm assuming that it'll carry forward a little bit.
How much of that depends on what else, like, what other things are going on, because we have to have IT support and all that stuff. So if we got, like, slow down modernization, well then, happy to.
We're pushing a piece of design to some other projects, we have to do it by then, or you
Or you
lose
lose it.
So I'm thinking, oh, does that mean we have to have it done by the?
Right. And to get a guy in is what I was talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or get a
Because we
person.
can't control that at all. But our people, so they say we're gonna be there again, well, we need that to work.
Yeah.
Okay, so
We don't really have a house out there, we don't really have like a business person that can help implement stuff like that, it's just not what we're set up for. So it would be some work.
Yeah.
Because you can't just hand the project over to someone, the project manager, you have to like bring resources from here.
Well, the other part too is the staff part, because we're software.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a change management exercise, but it's great, we have to know how to do this. Yeah. Make it past everything.
Like he may not be right for that at the moment.
Okay, yep, thank you.
So we will go to the next scenario, and that takes us to 0%. So again, very similar to the last couple of slides, it's that adjustment for landed ambulance of the 6,391. This is going back to the lodge at the 74,000, so it doesn't include the software piece. It's adding the growth of the $1.2 million. And the big change here would be the tax rate stabilization. So you'll see a large increase from using that. So that's the $4.3 million. Put the winter maintenance back to the $200,000, and then the provincial COVID funding at $133,000. So this scenario was really looking at using the state tax rate stabilization amount to that part. So as we go through each scenario, some of the suggestions in like scenario 2, 3, or 4, you could switch them around. So just showing you what options are out there. Any questions on scenario 4?
It's not really, it's for all of us, I guess. Maybe I should wait till the end, but. I know like in my municipality, we've had discussions about the tax rate stabilization fund and ideally, how much money do you want in that? So I guess I would ask you the same question I asked Chris, is how much money do you want in it?
So, that's a hard one to answer because through the use of proceeds, we put additional money in the tax rate stabilization. So I think you really have to think about going forward in the future, what are some of the big projects that you want to accomplish? And that tax rate stabilization is really going to be able to allow you to do some of those kind of projects. So that's why I keep referring to a little bit of what we put in there last year for surplus. And last year was an interesting year. The surplus was larger than we normally have. And that's made up of a couple of things. One is we got provincial funding for COVID, and we applied that to whether we had additional expenses or lost revenue. So we applied those COVID dollars. And we also had a true surplus because we were in COVID. So things like our libraries were temporarily closed for a period of time. We had some of those temporary layoffs. So we had some additional dollars that we didn't spend that normally we would spend. And that goes across every department, from travel, even office expenditures, all of that, where we traditionally would spend, say, $100 and we're only spending $25. So that's not a regular year. So that's why I keep pointing out that surplus that we use is a really good one that I would consider, that you should consider applying this year's tax rate. And then whatever you put on top of that. And that's why I said that's almost your starting base of what you want to be able to use for tax rate stabilization. Everybody on that one?
Yep. I just want to repeat what I said earlier about the closer we are to using it for the people that created it, the better I feel. Then the other thing I would say is, and I didn't hear her say this, but I know she would, is you don't want to use it for, you don't want to get in the habit of using it for anything that's ongoing, and that's why she said project. Because then you get yourself in trouble if something happens.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to add those 2 points. In terms of the dollar value that you feel comfortable with, that's more of there's no science to that.
Right.
because it depends on the time. And I would say that I actually feel like I'm speaking on both sides of the mouth because I want the money to get out the door, but I also feel a little nervous about these times we're about to go in. And so it's more about financial engineering based upon reasonable hypothesis about what's going to happen going forward. We know our costs of long-term care are going to go up. We know that our costs around land ambulance are going to go up, and we know our costs around social housing are going to go up. Like, that's a given, and it's even more so a given based upon what we're seeing because of COVID. So all those things have to factor into you thinking, well, maybe I should, it's okay to have a little bit more than you normally would, but at the same time, getting rid of surpluses and getting those out the door back to people you took them from as fast as you can, plus a little bit more. And that's where I get into my economic development argument. Get some out the door to try and get that tax rate lower because I don't have a lot of other things I can't say, hey, I've got a load of industrial land or a load of new commercial development. But keeping tax rates low for all of industrial and commercial makes it super attractive, and you need to do that.
We need a kickstart. We need a kickstart. I mean, it's like a machine that hasn't been used for a while. You got to give it a little extra gas, a little extra thing to kick in.
Everybody else is, that's like your competitors for industrial and commercial. Like, I've been warning about this for a while, but I wish there was something I could wave magic wand to make it happen. But your competitors for an industrial and commercial have the advantage of location. You have good locations, like your better locations in Bruce County, but you have to have other things besides locations, and when I say location, I mean co-location. Like, when Amazon comes to wherever they're, to one of their locations, that's going to mean 12 new businesses around it that you don't have. And so what is your competitive advantage is their rates are still rising. And if yours are going down, eventually that's going to make a huge difference. It already does with development charges. It already does with certain municipalities' development charges. It already does with taxes in certain municipalities. And it'll be so obvious, that whole Vaughan type of thing, or St. Thomas type of thing. You don't even have to say it. Like, the mayor's saying it for you, like there is a unique advantage of tax rates out there in different jurisdictions. So I'd say that's your economic development argument too.
5% lower.
That's what I meant, yeah.
Well, and there is a certain, the optics of, and we're talking like man-on-the-street optics, right?
Yeah.
You see us today in the building that's been sold. Where's the money? Where's the benefit? Like, I know that's really simplistic. That's the way people think.
And in this particular case, I think they should for at least part of it. Like that 1/3 was supposed to go to tax rate stabilization. Really, that means, like in my mind, that meant we're giving that back to you. That's what it means. Maybe not all at once, but.
Through the board, yes, I definitely would agree with that. I don't think you want to do it all at once, and I think you're looking kind of like at a 5-year strategy, really what's going on around us, what's going on in the world, and then you mentioned all of those increasing the costs that we really have to be thinking about.
The big thing.
So that's the 0% scenario. The next option is scenario number 5, and that's taking us to a negative. So a negative of 0.25. Again, the land ambulance, we have to adjust that, so that's the 6,391. This one, I'm putting the lodge back to the 139,000. And it also has that reserve to the 200,000 versus the 350,000. We have the administration, which is that 100,000. Again, that's the supplementary taxes. So going from the 700,000 to the 800,000. It has the growth amount. And this one's using the tax rate stabilization of $4,250,000. So another large amount coming out of that tax rate stabilization. So we have the winter maintenance still at the $225,000. And then we have the provincial COVID funding here at $133,000. So when I use my little template, so if I was to put 470,000, say I added that to the tax rate stabilization, that would be another 1%. What I mean by that, it would be a negative 1.25%. give you an idea of how the dollars works in this little spreadsheet that we're using. So any questions on the negative 0.25? If we look at the zero, we had a tax rate stabilization there of that 4,319,660. This one is using a little bit less, but that means we're using amounts from other areas. Then we're going to go on to another one. So I've got a scenario 6 that's put together yesterday. So you haven't seen this one yet. So it is again doing the land ambulance adjustment of the 6,000. This one says the lodge back at the 139,000. Again, trying to apply for provincial modernization funding if it comes. We also have the transfer from the reserve at that 200,000 versus the 350,000. So it allows us to have a balance in there. We have that again, the administration budget of that addition of the 100,000, which is the supplementary taxes. We have the growth amount of that over $1 million. And here it's taken the tax rate stabilization to the 2,836,000. We have the surplus of the winter maintenance still at the 225,000. And this is where this one changes a little bit because it's showing the using some of the provincial COVID-19 to offset some of the budget. So in addition to those ones we talked about, the 133,000, it's looking at the lodge budget and was saying, okay, there was a number of new positions that were added in 2022 that will not get any provincial funding allocated to them. And we heard the administrator come in and just talk about the last couple of years at the lodge and really needing some additional staff and support out there, really to address some of the challenges they faced with COVID over a few years. So we determined that, you know what, this is probably a good opportunity to apply some of that COVID dollars this year. So it was taking, it's a 1 full-time new nursing coordinator, it's 2 full-time day evening work clerk, it's 1 full-time floor support admin, and 1 part-time floor support admin, and that's for about $380,000. So give or take, if there's any adjustments to the scenario, you know I always go back to the tax rate stabilization and tweak it with that one, but that kind of gives you an idea. So again, those were positions that were asked for the municipality to fund fully in 2022. Not the new positions that were getting funded partly by the province. So I kind of pulled those 2 out. And that's how we come up with that 1.93. And then I could do any combination of any of those.
It's hard.
There's
Yeah,
there's only like a quadrillion different.
Yeah.
There is.
Yeah.
But I listened to what you asked me for on Friday, and I tried to give you those, plus that additional one at the end when we thought what other creative approaches could be tried. Now,
I was going to say, but this is good because this is 1.95 and 1.93, and when I look at those two and the differences between them, how you get to that number, what impact has on Chris, what impact has on Lodge or whatever. So yeah, it's good. I know it's kind of hard to focus on. It's so close to this, but the way it's, yeah, the logic behind it, the difference. Right.
Who wants to go first?
Yeah, okay. I'm gonna go first, because I think
Take the lead, Warden.
I've been thinking about this all the way on the drive and last night. And generally, traditionally, I have never been in favor of 0. You know, in my own discussions at our office, our little tiny budget compared to this, I've never been a fan of 0 because I think it's unrealistic. However, if we're gonna do it, this is the year to do it. And I believe that, I think you're right. I think you need that economic development kickstart. I think you need kind of sound silly and sloppy, but a good news story. I think, you know what I mean, if you're talking about numbers, I know that this story is not there, but I think to our residents, to go and say, listen, yes, the municipalities have determined what they need to do with all their different things that the province makes them do. We have to do this. There's no moving on the water bill. There's no moving on this or that. There's no moving on this. This we can do because we have a reserve. Province has given us money to use. Can't sit on it waiting for a tax. We have to use it. So that's what I was thinking as I was following a trust.
Is that
I'm so glad that we're gonna cut his budget.
I didn't hear what your zero.
Zero.
Okay, I just wanna make sure.
Over here. I don't care what we need to get there, whether it's a 500, whether it's a, you know, whatever, but that, I think, to me, is what I would like to see. And that, I'm just throwing it out there. Yeah.
So I don't know whether I'm at 0% in my mind yet. I'm certainly, and I'm definitely not in a negative. Like, I don't think that that's what, you know, I said on Friday, we were here on Friday, you know, that I was comfortable with the 1.9, and I still am. However, the arguments for economic development, the argument for taking the surplus that we had last year and actually, that is an actual real surplus, and investing it back and giving it back, those are all very compelling arguments for me. So I think I can get myself to that zero. And first of all, like, kudos to everybody for putting all these scenarios together. Thank you, you know, Chris, for saying about your winter maintenance reserve and being honest about that. And I do think that Brent has to be acknowledged in what he's come to the table with about what he would be willing to pull back on. As you know, for all the arguments that it's a ambitious list and realistic standpoint, you know, we're going to get through this. On the flip side, everything that we've said about how difficult it's been in the 2 years for them, and we talked on Friday about, you know, this sort of capital project list, and us investing in it is a real boost to the lodge too, and putting confidence back in. So, you know, good on Brent for, I think what he's given to us about what he can pull back on are realistic. They're not going to affect the day-to-day operations. I don't feel that, you know, like anybody's going to be unsafe because, you know, we're not. So kudos to him. So all that being said, I could probably get myself to the 0%, but maybe doing it with different pieces. Mm-hmm. I am interested in the one that, you know, reducing the administrative budget, and when you talk to about the write-off, you know, why maybe that should be in there, because again, it's another budget that we're not just focusing on one area in particular. And, you know, using the COVID dollars to fund the nursing positions, those positions, that is, I think, interesting and creative. And if we can use that, why not use that? Because again, it's make it COVID related. It's a direct relationship, and it's again investing in I like that. So as I say, if we can pull some of the pieces from the different scenarios to get to that zero. And I guess probably I might be more inclined to include the software reduction in this one as well.
Sorry, explain, include the software, you mean
Reduction.
Delay it or?
Taking it out.
Okay.
In these scenarios, it doesn't have the software reduction. But that could be something that I think we could probably say to put in to draw out, and maybe with using COVID and taking the software out, maybe then we can go back to the winter reserve being at 200 rather than
I'm on the same page. Zero, I'm with you, I've always said that, I've got nothing. This is the same reality.
We're in a whole different reality. We're not in Kansas anymore.
No. So that, for me, no, I don't think we're exposing our operations to risk. The only one I want about too restrictive. So you're okay with it, but I too would, if we defer the software and the money comes through, then we can always, but not having in our budget. And for would be big next to get modernization money for it as opposed to. Yeah, but the other part was the point you made about the staff, and even when they stop stress, how hard it is for people to. So it won't be any easier to get modernization money.
But it'll be a few months down the road.
Yeah.
And it will be.
Yeah, it's not like
it'll
holy
be,
crow,
you know.
did this and now we have to start. That's okay. I don't want to expose operations to risk. But if you're okay with that, but on the other hand, if we can float it around or something, you'd be working on, that was, I know I talked to that last year too, that in there, and that's important, and we're out there for a while. I think that's good. So, and stimulating our recovery. The recovery piece too, I think, increased costs, supply time differences, what the new world looks like in life and improvements, and that we don't know what it looks like, and how that kind of level of service that people, libraries and our reserves, you know. So they don't uncomfortable. We're going to see some good. Everything I've heard here so far. No, that's the thing. Normally I go zero. What's that going to do with reality?
I know.
Reality, that is different now.
I just said something that I mentioned, I think, just briefly last time, but we have, different challenges all the time come up. The latest big one is gonna be fight for talent.
Yeah.
That is the one that's gonna cost you a lot of money going forward, and, it's already here. The first wave of that fight for talent's already here. If Jeff was here, she'd be talking about recruitment, about how many applications we're getting now compared to just 2 years ago. And, yeah, that's the one that one really does scare me. Like, I remember, I think I said we need to have like a line item or some sort of, and I think Cindy dealt with that. But yeah, that's a really good point to not forget.
Because it's going to become a fixed cost. It's not variable to the extent that our contract and competition, the bidding wars that'll happen.
Yeah.
That'll become fixed costs. It'll be right into our operating, and it's not going to be.
Used to have to only compete. You used to only have to compete like this region. And when I say that, I mean southwestern Ontario. Well, okay, I'm close to a big city than the county of Bruce is. That helps for spouses and everybody else getting jobs and kids going to university. That's a great competitive advantage. But now I don't have that competitive advantage because it's essentially nationally, internationally, and it's a totally different ballgame.
Executive director of third round, 2 more. Third time around that they're going to try to get some. Have a bookkeeper? Do we outsource that? Do we have a? Do we still go for?
You mean inviting the job up?
Yeah. Yeah, because what's critical, what can be outsourced, like all the options are on the table.
Because when I was a kid, getting rid of middle managers was like a big thing, you downsize. Now go to try to hire somebody, do this remotely. And so I just am signaling to you that that's gonna be a cost center for you, because I'm starting to see the first wave of it now, and it goes all, leads all the way down to planning staff, road staff, and it's leading all the way down. Because if you think we're desperate for talent, how would you like to be in some of those other parts of southwestern Ontario, northern Ontario, and they're pushing their salaries way higher to just attract local people to come and
Moving costs, fund, bonus, it's the whole.
actually the whole 9 yards.
Anyway, so, yeah, I'm pretty comfortable. Yeah.
Thank you, Ward.
Sorry,
No, that's good. Didn't want to repeat everything again.
Okay. No, I'm actually good with zero as well. I'll be honest. Not that actual scenario maybe of, like, I don't like 4.2 million out of tax rate stabilization. But with a combination, I agree. I think a negative is unrealistic.
Yeah.
But, at this time, if we can do zero, I am glad to see some of the, traditional cuts weren't made. I can use, as an example, bridges. You know, we say, well, let's take, $1 million out of the bridge reserve, and that's put down 3.5. And we've sat at those conversations, and we know that's not realistic either. So I'm glad to see that what is cut. I do have a couple of points to it. One was, on the COVID, taking those positions and paying for them through COVID dollars. Next year, though, they would be on ours, or would they be on Ontario? Would those positions be, supported by the province, or are they gonna be on our dime next year?
Okay, so a couple of the positions, so one, two of them were funded, one human resource position, and the, communications, they would be county.
Okay.
I would assume that those new positions in long-term
Nursing
care
would be,
the county. However, we don't know. There could be additional funding that comes through from the province, and then they may be able to apply, but that would all depend on future funding from the province.
But the balance of probability is the first answer.
okay, that's just what I wondered, because
Yeah.
if we say we're gonna take that amount, off of that, and it's quite a large amount, that would mean next year that that's coming into our budget. Or could be. Yeah, so that's just,
The balance of
We can't
probability.
compare to,
Yeah.
we can argue that we can't afford all that.
the last point I guess I'd make is, and I agree, because I did ask Brent that, it's such a big list, it was like, doesn't seem it's possible, but one thing we didn't do, we didn't cut from the nursing other than the, software. All the support, services, all the cuts are to the support, from, the cooking, or dietary, laundry, maintenance, they've all been cut, so it's just, so all staff won't be happy, but it's just a comment I wanted to make to that, with those cuts, that it is to the,
You talking about those bridges, something?
yeah, the fridges, the dryers, the washers and dryers, the tractor, those are all support services.
Yeah.
And so,
We're just basically saying we're gonna work another half a year out of it.
Yeah.
if as long as we're going forward with, as you say, later in the year, he's putting in the tender for the coolers and they go into next year's budget, and that's understood, I think that's a very reasonable,
Yeah, and
very reasonable.
I would agree, there's no point paying something you can't get.
Yeah.
And wait till you can get it, and then you pay for it.
And
But
so,
but
but that's,
I think with his ambitious list and with us pulling back, I think the conversation on Friday, the conversation here, is that we're still willing to invest in this list. And whether it's and understanding that 2023 will be the year that we pick up the list.
instead of 899,022, it's gonna be 700,000, and then the remainder will be into the 20.
And did you have a comment?
Yeah, I just wanted to remind the budget committee that we are looking at some of those changes, whether it's COVID or tax rate. But even if we are taking the money from tax rate stabilization, the next year the counties have to pick that up. Or we'd be looking at tax rate stabilization again. So just want to remind that.
And that's why the 4.2, I think, is too big a number.
So if I can summarize a little bit of what I heard, so if you're looking at that 4,319,000, so we would reduce it by the 65,000, which was the difference in the lodge. 100,000, which was from the admin, and 380,000, which was the lodge capital. We're using, sorry, not lodge capital, it was COVID. So a total of those three items, 545,000. That's what we would reduce the tax rate stabilization by. So the 65,000 again was the adding in the software, taking that out. 100,000 from supplementary, and the 380,000 of those lodge positions using COVID. Kind of how that scenario would switch over. So that would leave the tax rate stabilization probably closer to about 3.774 million. That would switch.
Can you say that again, Frank?
Sure.
No, just that last million.
What? 3,774,660.
32 cents.
It didn't include that. So that's just taking the 4,319,660 and minusing that 545,000.
Muddy thing, but no, like I guess as I'm trying to work my way to get to the feeling completely comfortable at zero, when we were talking about, you know, yeah, this is the year, this is the year. So a couple things, I guess, just to keep in mind. There was a comment made, should we do it all in 1 year? If you do it over 2 years, does it, instead of a zero, does it look like a 1%? And then, you know, because to the point is, if we're going to cover some of these costs through COVID dollars, through tax rate stabilization, you know, you just made the point that, okay, well, next year we will have to pay for them. So do you just rip the Band-Aid off like once, and go zero and take the big hunk out of the tax rate stabilization, or do you do it over 2 years? I don't know. I mean, I guess I think that if we go to zero, the council's going to have to be very clear that the costs that we're picking up and covering this year will come back next year, and that who knows what then that will look like.
Additional thought on that, which are good thoughts. The other thing too, we have to keep in mind, I really believe that is almost 95% accurate. We're going to see a big bump in investment, like real growth.
Yeah, but that's always swirling in my head.
That's always swirling in my head too. Like, I don't know how it's not possible. Like, we had a local CAO meeting, Allison was on, and I said to Michael, how did you get such a low, like, I can't throw a ball without hitting a brand new house with no success. How come your real growth is so low? And he goes, we don't know either.
No, exactly.
And so there's a day coming where that, and just so in case anybody's listening to the tax, I'm talking about real new people, real new buildings, not fake assessment stuff to help pay. Now, that's a balance against the uncertainty of the future, but I think the balance of probabilities are that you're going to have that new investment there, new people will pay some of those costs. So I think the prudent approach that Kathy's talking about, I just don't want to lose sight of that.
A comment to that, Bill. It used to be from a couple of municipalities, right? There was three, let's say from 3 municipalities where you had that growth. Now the difference is the whole county.
Yeah.
Like, look what's happening, look what's happening everywhere. I mean,
And the
the
other
whole county has some.
growth, it's stable across. The other thing that is another factor that's in my brain is, and maybe Cindy, I'm not saying the truth here, so I just need your help on this one. But when we look at our reserves, what I mean by that is, when we look at our reserves now, we haven't received all of our money yet that's there. There's going to be more money coming into those reserves and more allocated. So I don't think it's fair to look at the reserves as a finite resource, because it's not like we have to guess. We know, and it's not just small amounts, like what we've received so far to put in reserve is very small compared to what's going to be. And like the trick is or Cindy, is the number from Stratfor Lodge in there? Like, is that been received yet?
What year did we get that in? So 2021?
Chris, I don't think it is.
It's not in there.
Treasury money's not.
If you want, I can quickly.
No, it's not
I
that.
have up to 5 years, so I have to put everything
Right,
in.
the 5 years is great, but my point is that, you know, you got Stratfor land, you got the rest of this land, so like, people think we got all the money already. We haven't, we're like way better. But it's not like it may come, it will come, like it's there before you.
Well, Bill, with your comment, that's all part of the thinking here for this year, right?
Yeah,
As we're talking, I think, Allison, you said it right, like if there was a year that,
it should give you greater comfort in my.
yes, and I think it's just how we get to it. And I know, Kathy, your point of like going 1%, I think honestly, the perception, the amount of dollars is not much different.
I know,
But the
yeah.
perception is, are we doing everything we can? And I think it's attainable and possible this year. And I guess I would ask your comfort level with it, Cindy. If we went to a zero and found a way to go to a zero budget.
So I leave that recommendation up to you.
No, but
However, I will say that, yes, you definitely do have a good amount from that tax rate stabilization. And that's why I really did point to what we've seen as that surplus. And we can probably expect that we will see a surplus after we do the year-end process. We also know that we have that additional provincial COVID dollars that we have to apply. So I'm very comfortable to say that there will be a surplus coming through, just because we were still dealing with COVID. All of our departments were still dealing with the pressures of COVID. So we did see some reductions to line items such as travel. We were doing virtual conferences versus going somewhere. So there is additional decreases because of that. We also know there's some decrease in our library system because, again, we weren't fully open all the time. We did some very creative approaches to what we were doing. And I also do want to point out that last year, so I'm going to kind of respond a little bit to Bill's comments, is that we worked with municipal tax equity consultants, and we had all of the treasurers come together, and we did a lot of training last year to really talk. So we walked them through how the tax policy works, but we also really walked them through how do we make sure that when we're getting new houses built, all the paperwork gets done properly and on time. So we did a lot of work around that. It was great conversations with all of our local treasurers and some of their tax staff. So I'm pretty comfortable that maybe we haven't captured some of that in the last couple of years. And again, I'm going to put it back to COVID and the pressures of staff and, working from home, and it's hard to get all of those pieces in place. So we did a lot of work to really understand the implications and how important it is to get that paperwork done in time. So if you have a new house being built, how do you make sure that gets to impact, that type of thing? So I am, I guess my comments are being consistent with what Bill said. I think we will see more money coming forward in the next few years because of some of that hard work that at the lower tier, all of your treasurers have been doing as well.
Just ask that question, not for the decision to be made, but just input, right? Just what everybody's thinking.
Just wondering historically, when the last time the county had a zero? Oh, it's
2 years ago.
not that long ago.
2 years ago.
That's been pretty frequent.
Last year we had an increase, but 2 years ago we were zero.
It's been pretty frequent. We have had negatives too. We've had a couple of negatives, like I think pretty frequent going like this range of time, not like this range of time. Yeah. It's more common here than anywhere else in Canada, I think, but because we've had zero that hasn't scared us. It's just, and we want to keep up with it. Like traditionally, we want to keep up with inflation.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say that too, is we do have to think about that. You have to think about inflation. It's not only this year, but we're going to see that as we go forward. We see the stuff going on with just materials going back and forth, and how hard it is if you go to the grocery store, some of the shelves are starting to get a little bit empty, right? Like there is some pressure on the systems right now related to COVID, but and what will happen in the future. We definitely see inflation going up.
Let's think about supply money too, and putting on some of those software. Do that software thing.
That's one of those things that they go up.
Yeah, or does it go down? You never know.
You never know if it go back down.
Like, I mean, everybody's talking inflation, and you read something from somebody else, it's when we're going to go into a recession.
Yeah, one.
So like, I mean,
one-
you know,
We got it.
one, you know,
One could be, I think,
If you put in the recession.
Yeah.
We don't know what monetary policy is going to be either. I mean, people could be struggling to pay for their mortgages in monetary policy in the state.
all right. So, do we just want to get into zero?
So is everybody in agreement to the zero? and putting forward?
Yeah.
Show of hands. Yep, unanimously.
That's what I was thinking.
Okay, so I think that's
There. Like on the bar.
through the warden, I understand the way to it, like, the laws would be.
I'm a little stressed about some of the variables. The other thing, like, we're not totally broke even.
No,
I know.
we're
I know.
sitting nice, we're sitting nice.
Okay, so if I'm correct, we still obviously will do the land ambulance of the 6,391, because I want to adjust it to keep that. The Stratfor Lodge, I believe it was going to be the 139,000, because it'll include the software. One question I do have, because we haven't talked about it, is that transfer from reserve. A couple of the scenarios, some I had 200,000, some I had 250,000. So I would need resolution around what you would like to do with that one.
I mean, would really, the difference between 200,000 and 250,000, I would go to 250,000.
Okay, so I'm going to do the 250,000.
Yeah.
Does that leave us about 100,000?
Yeah.
250 leaves about 100,000.
Correct, yeah.
So 250 is the number there.
Okay,
We ran back and forth, that's silly. Yeah. Getting glad I got that.
and the tax rate will just be close to that amount I gave you.
Yeah.
So the winter maintenance, 200,000, did I hear for that one? Okay, and the COVID, I believe I heard that we were going to do the three that I've talked about all along, 133,000, plus also those ones for the 380,000 from the lodge. So those are the additional new positions that we're currently funding for the county.
That was on the last.
Very last.
It's on the very last one, yeah.
Oh, yeah, off that's going to be stuff.
And the other one, I particularly like with the administration budget.
Yeah.
Reducing it by 100,000.
Or yes, I have that on my list here too, with 100,000. So that's adding a revenue, but decreasing the budget by 100,000.
Adding the revenue, yeah.
My TV.
Friday.
Even though you put the plot with us, we'll provide That's okay.
So yeah, so I think that's everything that I would put in there.
Okay.
And then the difference, of course, will be the tax rate stabilization.
You just fill in the gap.
Right, so to be closer to that 3.7 we talked about.
Yeah, let's set it around the 3.7.
Yes, roughly, that would be around. But obviously, I'll put this presentation together and send it back to you, so you're comfortable that I've captured everything, but,
Yeah, we need to talk on those.
yeah.
Yeah. So, what have you written so far, Nancy?
A lot of nonsense.
What is she writing? A lot of nonsense.
That the budget committee recommended 0% increase. And maybe we can work on that.
Yes, we could put that in.
Yeah, that would be fair.
200 under the winter maintenance. So I can go through that again. The land ambulance was adding of the 6,391. The Stratfor Lodge was decreased by 139,000. The transfer from reserve is now 250,000 versus the 300,000. Again, we would add the growth. Surplus for the winter maintenance was at 200,000. From the administration budget, we're going to increase the supplementary taxes by 100,000, going from 700,000 to 800,000. And for the COVID-19 funding, we have the original 133,000, and we're going to add on that additional 380,000, which ties back to those new positions that were in the lodge. And then the remainder will be the tax rate stabilization.
That's my motion. So, mover. Right? Second. All in favor? Done. And now it is now 11:18. So I will bring this meeting to what? No, something else?
Yes. So I just want to make sure, because it was a question that you asked during the meeting, so I don't want to sign off the meeting without fully talking about it. So Bill, Chris, and I did go back to the department head and sent an email on Saturday morning.
Yep.
and ask them to look at their budget again, and that question that, Brian asked was in regards to if you had to reduce your budget, what would you reduce it by, and what would be the implication of that? So we did get responses back, so the department heads did reply, and we're more than willing to talk about some of those if you want.
I think that might be questions that come from, let's say, when we get to council. There could be a counselor asking more specific questions to a department.
Yeah, so
And it's good to have those, because you have to know the impact.
let's hear the answers now. Yeah.
So Chris is gonna start with transportation. I think you've already got the one for transportation, but,
Yeah, no, we recognize that, you know, we try to keep the budget as lean as we could. The increases in our budget are the expected inflation numbers. We won't see it when the tenders close in a couple of weeks for our asphalt, but because we have the investment summer, we were fortunate to get OSIF funding to cover off some of that capital expenditure, and we're capital. And then we were at that 0.9%. So to get to zero, my suggestion was we take somewhere in the range of $200,000 out of maintenance surplus from last year. Again, you know, the hairs in the back of my neck don't go up as much as they did maybe even 5 years ago when we had nothing in the winter maintenance reserve. Now we're about half a year's worth. And I don't see, because we have a solid union contract right now, and I don't see anything in the marketplace that scares me that we would have a shutdown for some reason, which is where we would utilize that reserve in a massive way. I'm pretty confident right now, and I think we'll. The basis for my budget was no significant changes to anything, pre-approved 5-year capital forecast, and try to be mindful of our potential cost increases, especially on the equipment side, which is my recommendation coming back was to use some of that additional winter maintenance last year to offset this.
Right.
Just a question to that winter maintenance reserve. And I know it was in a negative. Was that used from very specific, or was it just never a reserve?
Well, we through the warden, we just had big overruns. We were, you know, we had our winter maintenance, you know, our budget was severely underfunded. We were putting about 2.5 when I started. I think we had about $2.5 million a year in winter maintenance. We'd overrun that easily by $800 million a year. So that's council supported the recommendation of staff to do 7% year to year to get us to where we needed to be. We've got a little bit ahead of that now, so I'm recommending, well, last year we made the recommendation to back off that 7% and bring it back in line with our other maintenance items. So that the money is there if we see an overrun, and we've just, you know, again, touch wood, that we've been very fortunate weather-wise for the last couple of years. We haven't had those severe winters, but do you remember years where our staff were in trucks 7 days a week for months at a time, and that just kills our
middle of March, right?
I remember sitting in the porta potty going, 8 months. Just check, I'll check.
And our fear is gas. I mean, Bill just showed me an article thinking that we're gonna have $1.75 gas prices by the summer.
Mm-hmm.
If that will come in to hit us for our diesel prices, and we will really have some trouble. So that's sort of where we have that additional. Again, we had a normal to heavy snow winter with huge increases in inflationary costs on our fuel. Now, fortunately, we're in a salt contract, so our salt prices are held pretty. We're okay there, but with those numbers could, again, they did a pretty big jump last time we renewed the contract.
So for the administration budget, which is quite large, it includes everything from council to CAO to the clerk to the treasury to legal and human resources. You've seen that we have in there the supplementary taxes, so we increased that by $100,000. We also, I thought we were a little creative in being able to use some of the funding from COVID-19 for the communication strategy and for the part of human resource positions. They definitely do directly relate and align to COVID-19 and the pressures, what we've been hearing from the community, hiring additional staff and land ambulance, that kind of, and then, of course, if you wanted to do a reduction, you could look at the new procurement positions that we've added, but those again, are being recommended by, the consultant. It was part of our modernization, and it's also, positions that would be used to support all of our local municipalities. Those are areas that we could look at. So from the library, I've got a couple that could be considered. One would be to reduce the hardware replacement plan, and it would be a delay of the replacement of the microfilm reader printer for Stratfor Library. So that's about $11,000. Well, obviously, the implication would be that it needs there would be additional cost for repair. The life cycle of that. The other one she recommended is, if you remember, I'm trying to think, I think it was last year's budget, we have that hardware replacement reserve that we put in there. So you're saying that you could take 50,000 out of that if you want. That's really worth 50,000, sorry, 50,000. Yeah. That was more, we were trying to streamline costs. So very much like PSAB and life stabilization for that. So that's the one for the library. A second, while I pull everybody's email up.
We talked Lodge, while you're pulling up. I mean, we talked Lodge a fair bit, but really the discussion with Brent was about prioritizing his capital replacement list, capacity, internal capacity to accomplish everything on the list. And then our philosophy was, and we didn't really mention this, but you'll see nothing on there is anything that compromises patient care. And there's a lot of tools there, as Brian was saying, maybe the people who do the laundry won't be happy to see those washer dryer stay for, and it's only it's like a 6-month window of additional time. But the low beds, the lifts, the tubs, the medication dispensers, all that stuff is left in there, and I think that's critical for the health of our care, people delivering the care, and for the care of the residents themselves. So that was all left in there. Brent did bring that up, and we wholeheartedly agree with that. So that list is there. There's some question marks still, the tractor, whether or not we can get that in time. There's some renovations of some HVAC things that may take a little more time than normal, but until we actually get to the process, we won't know for tender.
I have a question here I want to ask your committee that I think is worthwhile asking, and that is the tractor. No, it's not about the tractor. It's about how they do, like, they use that for plowing snow. And so we're doing that ourselves, so instead of having it contracted out. And I guess that's, and Chris, I mentioned this to you, we talked about it the other day a little bit. Yeah. Have they looked at contracting out snow maintenance, even lawn maintenance, but looking at their yard, some of their yard maintenance, or at least partial, and so that's just a question I would have to the Lodge, and it maybe take some of the headaches off of.
Well, quite frankly, I was surprised to see the tractor in there. I thought that would have been already done, like, a while ago.
So it's just a question, I think, for Brent, I guess. Have they looked into contracting it out and,
But you noted that the people who were doing maintenance, they
Well, the people that did it entrance, right?
yeah, but I'm saying they're changing things in the scenario. Maybe it's time to look at the whole thing and then contact these people who are not doing this now, or we need to maybe it's garden maintenance.
We've got the motion we need for. Then go. Yeah, we can talk about that.
yeah, that's just a conversation I think to have heavily considered.
I guess my comment is, then, were we too quick on the budget before we got these lists? Like, too quick on the motion to say where your cuts should be.
Well, that would be for next year's budget, that if they would go.
Yeah, but I wouldn't want to see, like, the discussion about contracting out and buying a new tractor. Like, I'm thinking, I want to buy the new.
But think, let's say worst case scenario, right, not truck. Hey, I'm in the meeting, I'll call you right back. It's like, no, I thought you were.
Here, do that for me too.
Anyway, what I was saying was, let's say worst case scenario, that's truck. Tractors, I mean, you could trade in a tractor and lose what, $3,000, $4,000 anymore, like, it's huge for, like, youth stuff is huge right now. Like, I know Brian, like, I mean, it's not like it used to be where it's like you walk off the parking lot and you're already down 10 grand. So, I don't know.
I guess it's just a conversation, I think, for you to have with Brent about whether it's, because if you do contracting, you don't need a $50,000 tractor.
No.
Because I was trying to figure out why were they buying, like, you know, and then you said they do their own snow removal. Well, now that means I assume maintenance people are coming in during the night, and that affects everything. So it's just a question.
No, I think it's legit.
So I do have a big question before Kathy goes, because it goes to Dirk. He just wanted to, if you remember, you put a motion forward for regarding the clean water project and having UTRCA come and do a presentation.
Yeah.
He wanted to know, do you want that presentation done before our council meeting in March, or does it matter?
We're in agreement with what they're building.
Okay.
I mean, you know, we've agreed on it before. Have we not? Like, I mean, it's all about tree planting, we all know we're down on the canopy. So, sort of a information thing, one. What do you think?
I don't think we need it early.
No, I don't think we need it early. I think council is informed enough that if there was question on it, they could have the discussion when the budget's presented, and they would know enough about the program if that was an area that they were looking at and discussing, you know, so, yeah.
Okay, great. I will follow up, and he'll just try to get the presentation when he can get it in. Okay.
A few more.
We've got a couple more. So I have, obviously, for planning. So just a generic comment, like could take $1,000 out of operations. You know, that's going through each line item. And then he could delay computer purchases, and I guess you could say that for everybody, right? Because it would just be putting the years out in terms of follow the recommendations we get from the IT department and life cycle maintenance. And then his other comment was for special projects this year, he's saying that you could take off 5,000 of special projects if you wanted. Those are a couple of the ones that he had.
5,000 special.
I think he's more talking about deferral of some things like OC review.
Timing difference as opposed to.
Yeah.
Actually, I can read. He said, the impact would be hard to determine at this time, as the funds are used for project work and for backfilling of the consultant. So then I think it really does tie into planning, so busy right now.
We're not trying to.
I would recommend.
We don't want to bump something back, especially like with hardware and stuff like that. It just means next year we got to buy double. We have to keep doing our business.
I think it just shows Dirk's being thoughtful and looking for small budgets, being thoughtful about it. He's like Dirk and Cindy and Brent, like they're being thoughtful about going back and rethinking these things, which is why he's finding small numbers.
Yep. No.
So economic development was a little bit more complex because the budget, as you know, last year we had lots of conversation around that budget and adding some positions. And those budgets do really support that strategic plan that I know you've invested in. I know that Bill talked a lot about that. So you'd have to unwind a few things if we wanted to reduce anything from it. That out there like that. And then I'm just going to open up Neil.
All that position is that throughout the years of looking at the budget through county to county, we have always been underfunded economic development. Look at Albany, look at Oxford. Not saying that they spent their money wisely, but I'm saying, and I think you can be creative with a smaller budget because it's just the fact that you don't have money to spend, but it's not like we've been out there blowing big dollars for years. Long time coming together.
Through the warden, I know I work a lot with Kara, but she's been really working hard to go after any grants that are available. So we're going to be able to talk soon, hopefully, about a new grant coming, but constantly, year after year, we've been able to get grant money to support the economic development department. So she's been able to use the dollars that the county has provided and been able to stretch them by being really resourceful and innovative, I believe.
Also allows, with extra staff that you got last year, more interaction with lower tier. And that's That's good for all the counties. And I don't care which lower tier it is at that time, but certainly has been very involved with, the lower tiers and we can get them more involved. So that has.
And they feel like getting value.
Yeah,
Right.
I think that's a comment I made when I said this, like, what value are we gonna get? What extra do we get in? And, I don't have to ask the questions because I have seen it at least at the county, but also in the lower tier, just still working together. So, yeah.
And so if we go to look at land ambulance, so we could obviously look at the new ambulance staffing that we put in this year. I don't know if we want to do that because it's really addressing our situation right now with our upload delays. We could delay some of our facilities, but again, and then we could reduce education. But we've talked a lot about education and the importance of it. So, but those are suggestions. And we also, when we went back, we wanted everybody to really understand too that their budgets are supporting everything from the county strategic plan, to the library strategic plan, to the economic development strategic plan. And I know I talked to the warden a bit about that when we're presenting the budget that you've approved forward. We're really going to try to wrap around those conversations as you present it to the actual council. But it's a budget where you've invested in a lot of ways, and we're really going to talk about those investments from everything from Christina and I talked even about the increases in the capital from the lodge. We looked at it from, you can put some together in modernization. You can put some that are directly patient-related and patient-supportive. You can put some that are facility updates. We talked about the age of the building and how important it is. And then there's the last one that would be the mechanical. And again, it's supporting the building and the age of the building. So we're really going to make sure that we pull all of those ingredients, if you want to say it, under the budget and really show how the county is investing.
I think the positions created too are valuable, like, I mean, because we've gone down that road before, and I think it's pretty lean. A lot of people are wearing different hats, so it'd be nice to have dedicated communication, dedicated procurement. Like, I think that will help rent the lodge, right, and the procurement will help with that. Be a lot of different.
And it will help our taxpayers. That's the same taxpayer. If we can save money buying our equipment by working together, that's for the good of the taxpayer. That's the whole point to me to these positions.
One thing, I thought, the levy supported the procurement. Cost of that is going up.
Yes, it is.
The positions like, but then.
But when you were presenting that before, I thought to myself, wait a minute, that.
Yes, we're not going to do similar to our legal department. We're not going to be filling out. We're just going to recommend putting that on the levy. And no question, by the decisions and the conversations you've had today, you've talked a lot about the taxpayers and really focusing on the impact of COVID-19 on our community. So we're definitely going to be including a piece around that. It's probably the preamble, probably the comments that you'll make, Gordon.
That's the stage.
Something that probably will come out of council is, when do we stop throwing money at EMS? When do we just stop throwing more money into it, more people? And no, but the reality is we won't unless something changes from above. Like, otherwise, we have to provide that service. And so it's a service we must provide, and that's what you're stuck behind, right? Until, I don't want to pick on any specific thing, but if it isn't changed above us, like at the hospitals and different places, it is what it is. We have to provide that service.
For a while.
The other piece through the warden is we also can talk about is we have growth dollars. And if we look at land ambulance, definitely the increase in the land ambulance is aligned with the growth we've seen in the county. It's the growth in the city, but it's also the growth in the county. So we definitely can make sure that we're talking about that, is like growth is kind of paying for growth. And I know those in the past conversations I've had with the City of London is applying some of their growth dollars to offset those increase in ambulance, because it is directly related to more people moving to our community. And we've seen that again with COVID. A lot of individuals want to move to our great community.
I had one question on a line item that I forgot to ask, and it just, under members of council.
Yes.
It has, on the second line, I think it is benefits, around $9,000.
Yes, PT.
What is that? Oh.
Yeah.
It's just, that's what Because that was one that was like, it said benefits.
Yeah.
Wait, no, we don't have benefits.
No, they're
We
just
get to come
ones,
here, right?
Sure, yeah, every,
the ones that
No,
we're
I just
required
wanted
to
to
pay.
clarify that. Thank
They're
you.
tied to ones that we are required to pay. So yes, or no, you don't have over,
So
you
that's put
don't
in
have any of
benefits.
those other things. So,
I might have asked that question
you
before.
did last year.
Yeah.
is there any benefits?
Yeah.
I think that's covered every department, but we don't think it's benefits.
Yeah, you got everybody.
Well,
I
no,
think that's covered everybody.
Yep.
But I do appreciate that they all went back and took time during the weekend and came back with a response and was very, as Chris pointed out, very thoughtful and, some, like, for example, planning is mostly staff, right? So if it's not staff, then you have to go into some line items, so. And I told them to be prepared, because council might have some other questions.
Good to have on hand for budget
Yeah.
meetings in March.
Great, so,
Well, I wanted to make sure I wrapped that in, because that was a really big question that you did ask, and, we were able to respond, so I think it makes your process inclusive.
no, I'm just kidding. All right, motion to adjourn. Thank you. Yeah, all right, all.
All in favor, yeah?
Yeah, all of us.
Kathy's not gonna oppose